Okay, Erin, I think you're good to go.
All right. Let me just make sure I get it to the slide presentation. Can everyone see the slides?
I can see them.
Yeah, I can see them.
Great. Okay. So, and I'm going to just introduce myself because I know a few of you may not know me. My name is Erin Coley, and I am the Workforce Attraction Manager at SLAC. And so essentially, you know, there's a wide variety of names in human resources for recruiting. Some people call it talent acquisition. Some people call it people. At SLAC, we call it workforce attraction. So I am going to share with you guys a little bit of information about how to plan your interview. And I do want this to be interactive. So if you do have questions as we're going through, feel free to come off mute and ask a question. We'll certainly give ample opportunity, and there is a little bit of a demonstration that will happen as a part of this as well.
And you can use the chat as well for questions.
Yes. So, you know, when you're about to interview, and you know, we're thinking of this primarily if you're interviewing for an internship, a job, something related to work. Although to a certain extent, you can certainly extend this if you're interviewing for university. I think a lot of the things that we're going to mention here would apply. So the key thing, and we talked about last time when I spoke about sort of your resume and cover letter, you always want to make sure you look at your resume and cover letter. Make sure you know what you sent off to the current employer. Make sure you can speak to the experience that you have for the job. And then secondly, you want to really identify, you know, what are the technical skills that they might be thinking about for this position. Some job descriptions are very broad, but some can be very specific. So you'll want to reread the job description. And I know sometimes you apply for a bunch of jobs and then they've taken it down and you can't find it anymore. In those situations, it is appropriate for you to ask the point of contact, be it the recruiter. You can ask them, you know, could you send me the job description? I no longer have access to it. Ideally, you will have saved it, but if you haven't, that's okay. Go ahead and ask for it. It's better that you have it and that you can look through it. So your technical skills are skills that you'll be asked about, you know, that are specific to your knowledge and experience, generally acquired through education and or training. So examples could be, you know, skills that require knowledge of different types of lab techniques, different types of machines or equipment, knowledge of different regulations, specific kinds of computer hardware or software or programming languages. Those would all kind of fall under the technical skills. While I'm doing the slides, it's hard to see if there's a chat. So if, Lloyd, could I ask if there is a question in the chat, would you mind sharing it?
Erin, I will share. This is Diana.
Wonderful, thank you. So the other part of an interview are sort of what people call performance skills or competencies. And these are closely related to work habits and reflect the way a person will get a job done. They're also more difficult to assess and will likely be the focus of most interviews. So they are the tasks and responsibilities assigned to the position, and they may relate to making and being responsible for decisions, following established guidelines, following specific policies and procedures, dealing with departments, dealing with clients or the public, interacting with your team colleagues or your work broader colleagues, and sort of managing your workload or managing the tasks or work at hand. within HR, the current belief in interviewing is that you follow the model of behavioral-based interviewing. And that is based on discovering how the interviewee, meaning you, acted in a specific situation. Sort of the logic is how you behaved in the past will predict how you behave in the future. So often past performance predicts future performance. Now, key things to note is there are not right or wrong answers. How you've handled something is how you've handled something, and you want to be honest and truthful. You know, how you behave in a given situation is sort of what you're answering, and it helps determine if there is a fit between your skills and the position. And when you think about sort of this concept, how you behaved in the past predicts how you'll behave in the future, be mindful that all of your interview is included. So when you arrive at the potential receptionist and how you're interacting with the receptionist, recruiters will often go back to the receptionist and check in. When you're at lunch, often there are casual conversations, but that is a part of your interview. If you're on a tour, the questions you ask, how you behave, even when you're parking your car, if you're interacting with anybody, that is all included in your interview. And that, I'm not saying this to scare you, it's just, you know, just something to be mindful of. So when you think about how to ask those behavioral-based questions, think about, there's quite a few different guidelines. There's a STAR and a CAR, and we kind of went with this one, SAR, which is pretty simple. S is the situation. What happened? A is your action. What did you do? And then R are the results. What results did you achieve? And be prepared, you know, if you're working on a group project and you're talking about what happened, be prepared for somebody to come back and say, what was your role? What did you do? You know, be specific if possible in saying, you know, we blah, 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 and I took on the task of whatever that may be. And at the end of most interviews, you will be given the opportunity to ask questions. Now, sometimes interviews are going to be one-on-one, and sometimes you might have panel interviews. And in the case of panel interviews, it could be 2 people, it could be 3 to 5 people, it could even be more. If you're, you know, in a situation where you have lots of people, you'll still want to ask questions of the individuals. You may not be able to ask every one of them, but be prepared to come and ask questions. One, it shows that you're interested in the job, that you're thoughtful, and that you know, really are engaged. So here are a few sample questions. And I think we're going to be sharing these slides because there's another handout later, but these are not on there. You can always ask, well, I should say, if you have a burning question, you know, ask that. If they talked about something, follow up on that. That shows that you're engaged. But if you don't, if they've been very clear, you'll still want to ask something, and you could ask, what do you like working? You know, what do you like about working here? What do you most enjoy about the job or the company? If it's somebody who has grown, you can always ask about what steps did it take for them to grow in their position? What does a typical day look like for somebody in this role? And if it is sort of and often intern positions are fairly broad, and so you can always ask, what specific projects will this position work on? Does that make sense?
Erin, we have a question.
Sure.
Is there such a thing as asking too many questions at the end of the interview?
I think you'll have to read body language. My general thinking is no. They might say, you know, I'm so sorry, we don't have any more time, but I think if you come prepared with 7 questions, that's very appropriate. As a recruiter, I love it when I see somebody pull out their notebook and they have their list of questions. If you know in advance that you're going to be meeting with different people, say you're going to be meeting with the person who would be your supervisor, you know, a group of peers, and then maybe a recruiter, you might ask them different questions. So the people who are your peers, you might say, what specific projects would I be working on? If you're, meeting with somebody who's going to be the manager, you could ask that same question, or you can ask a question of, what does a typical day look like? And so you can kind of flip-flop that, but you wouldn't necessarily ask the recruiter those questions because they're probably not doing the job themselves, but maybe you could ask, what do you like, or what do you enjoy most about this job or the company? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Erin. There is a continuation to this question. What if it is a screening interview and it is over the phone?
In that case, you probably wouldn't be prepared to ask all of the kind of sample questions, but I think it's always appropriate to ask, what are the next steps? When would I hear back from you? And certainly you could ask, if they give you the opportunity, do you have any questions? Something along the lines of, are there specific skills that you're looking for in this position? So a screening question, or a screening interview, you absolutely can ask questions as well.
Thank you, Erin.
You're welcome. All right, so at the closing of the interview, I sort of jumped ahead a little bit, but you do want to thank the person or thank the team. One of the things that we're always mindful of is, we schedule you to talk with a bunch of people. They have their day jobs and then they're interviewing on the side. And especially, if it's a super busy time, that does take away. I would say most people understand the value because it is a mutual relationship that you're in the interview process. You're not only being interviewed, you're interviewing the company, especially when you have multiple opportunities. But you do want to thank them for their time. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, ask about next steps. When should you hear back? What is the next step in the process? I can say that recruiters are often very busy, or hiring managers are very busy if they're, recruiting for intern positions. It's very appropriate to say, when should I hear back? And if they say, oh, in a couple of weeks, I would take that opportunity at that time to say, is it okay if I check in with you in, if they say a couple of weeks, 2 weeks? It is always appropriate to kind of establish that and then also follow up, because the reality is it's sometimes the case they're just so busy and swamped, and it's the student who is appropriate in their follow-up that they get a second look. So we didn't practice this, but Diana and Julia are going to do a little demonstration of a few questions, and then I'll kind of share my comments back, and we'll and you guys also can ask on that.
Erin, I wanted to add just 3 quick notes to your slide. One is on a thank you note, it's better to send it, within a day or 2. Don't wait a week. That's usually not a very positive sign to it is much better than not to ever send a thank you note, but it looks good if you were prompt with your thank you note. And then the other thing is attire for your interviews. It's better to be overdressed than underdressed. And also make sure you're comfortable in whatever you're wearing, especially if you expect to go on a tour. So for example, at SLAC, if you were to interview, the tour may include going to places where closed-toed shoes would be required. So just be mindful of where you might be going to, so you're comfortable in whatever environment you will be. And then the other thing that, from my personal experience, I would recommend doing a mock interview or a trial interview with a company you don't necessarily, that's not necessarily on top of your list. It sort of helps you go through the steps and experience what it really feels like. And so next time around, you would be, significantly more comfortable responding to questions, and sort of understand how the process works. So a lot of the universities will have mock interviews, so make sure you take advantage of that. And then even if they don't, just try a location or a position that's not necessarily on top of your list, so you sort of get that experience.
Yeah, the next slide talks about practicing interviews, etc.
Oh, excellent. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of you. And then Loy asked a question, what does overdressed means? Thank you, Loy. So my preference is a suit for an interview, or an appropriate, it could be a pantsuit or a skirt suit. And in some cases that might feel overdressed. So if you are at the work environment, you will probably be the only one wearing a suit, compared to, people that are there, right? They probably will be wearing business casual. But it is better to be in that position than come in sort of jeans that, have holes cut through them or something like that. So it's better to err on the business professional looking side than on the casual looking.
And I would say, always plan for what we would call business casual, meaning, slacks, nice jeans, an appropriate top. Always plan for that. And then yes, dressing above that is always appreciated, or at least noticed. You can also always ask whomever your point of contact is, what is appropriate. So, if you're at college and you're interviewing for an internship, you may not have a suit with you. And so I don't think that would be the expectation, but, dress as nice as you can. And even if you aren't sure about the, if you're going on a tour or closed-toed shoes, if there are those requirements, most of the time they will let you know that, but you do want to be comfortable. I've definitely been in an interview where somebody is constantly adjusting their shirt because it used to fit, it no longer fits, and it's very distracting.
Those are the 3 notes that I had to add. So did you want to go to your next slides, or did you want to do the interviews tries?
We were going to do the practice at this point in the slide.
Okay, excellent. Well, okay. So I haven't prepared or looked over the questions that were sent. So we'll see how this goes.
Okay. So I interview Diana, right? Or Diana, you interview me.
You were supposed to interview me.
Okay, perfect. So like this one, please be specific and answer this question. What did you do in your last job to contribute toward a teamwork environment?
In my last job, so I was working in a laboratory at a civil engineering machine shop, and there were a couple other interns that we were working with together, and we had to coordinate our times because all of us had different schedules with classes, so that we could complete our tasks on time as they were given to us. So to do that, we agreed to meet at a certain time of the week, just for 5 minutes to make sure, we can be on the same page. And so when we come, each one of us knew what we needed to do, and so that our work together sort of came came up and was successful, you know, when we were completing the project.
Okay. Erin, do you want to comment on that, or shall we go ahead?
Sure. So I would just say, one, I appreciate that she was sort of rephrasing in my last job is how she started that. And that, you know, is making sure she understood, but also helping herself. It is always okay if you need a second to say, ooh, can I have a second to think of an example? And then her example was very clear. So that was a real strong positive. She really was sort of walking us through that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did you want to ask one more question?
Or did you want to comment on how I could improve in my answer?
I can comment on I didn't get exactly maybe of the audio, but get when if you said team you decided to do it, but I was asking what's your contribution. Was it you to organize and propose that meeting, or was like something that came up as a team and your contribution was attending the meeting? That's it. Yeah. So when you, I mean, it's always difficult to say I did it, because most of the job that you do is like something that is in a group and ideas come together, but it's really important to specify what your contribution is in a general, in the activity that you are describing. Yeah.
And so in that case, I mean, it's appropriate for the interviewer to come back and ask those questions. That's sort of what I was talking about before. They might come back and say, so what did you specifically do?
Mm-hmm.
So my response could be, well, you know, I was the one to coordinate and set up the time when we should all meet. When I looked over our schedule, I could have added if I was asked.
Yeah.
We have a question on the chat. Say you didn't get the job. Is it appropriate to ask what areas your application lacked? Also, is it appropriate to ask how you can improve at the end of the interview?
So I would say it depends who you're talking to. So to answer the last question first, if you're with the recruiter, you know, or maybe the hiring manager, you might say, is there anything else I can address for you? But I don't know that at that time you would ask, how can I improve?
And I think it also depends on the setting of the interview. If it felt like, you know, you have established a relationship that looks like you might continue having a conversation for perhaps maybe other opportunities that the company will have, you know, it may feel like it is an appropriate thing to ask, but I don't think as a person, if I was interviewing someone, I probably would not feel comfortable at the point of the interview to give them feedback.
Right.
Just because we are evaluating multiple applicants and, you know, you have to follow a certain process to make
I agree. And then there is another thing that policy are very strict. Even if you receive the letter that you didn't get the job, if you go back and ask why I didn't get the job, they usually don't say what was the process. And I mean, they cannot say to you, hey, you did it very bad, or they cannot say to you, hey, you did very good, but we had already a candidate. So it's kind of, I mean, if if they answer something, you have to take it like with some, well, with some reservation. I don't know how to say it, like with some, not sure you can believe it 100% or not, because they're always very careful at saying, yes, you were not selected because.
And it's also a case that even if they want to give more info, sometimes they just don't even have the time. You know,
Yes.
often for intern positions, you get, you know, you might have interviewed 6 people and then you have another intern and you're interviewing 6 people. So sometimes it's not a case of they don't want to, they just legitimately don't have enough time. But there's no harm in you know, if you don't get the job, saying, you know, thank you, I really enjoyed it. Is there anything that I could do differently, or anything, any feedback you would give me for the future? And you may or may not, but there's nothing wrong with asking it.
Yeah, I agree.
So the follow-on question is, so then how do you know where to improve on your interviews if feedback is hard to get? Well, I can answer with, you know, mock interviews and trying going through interviews. I think it's very important to have that experience.
Yeah, it's more practicing with somebody that can give you real feedback and truthful feedback. I mean, and in the practice, it's the way that it's a place where you learn more. And then, of course, when you do an interview and then you come out and you think back, maybe you realize yourself, maybe that answer, I didn't do it right. And with practice of interview, after many interviews, you kind of, you know, you're in the moment, you answer something, and then you get out of there and say, oh, well, I should have answered something else. So rethink also about the interview that you did and the answer that you gave, and kind of think how you could have answered better, maybe.
Well, and that's where I think the key, you know, we've talked about is practicing. So, you know, if your career center at school has the opportunity to do mock interviews, we can't, you know, stress enough how important it is to do those. Especially, I know I've participated with the local school here where they bring in employers to, you know, interview. So I volunteer essentially to spend a few hours and interview with the students, and you're going to get really good feedback being able to do that. And then, you know, be it practicing with a parent, a relative, you know, your neighbors, whomever. Essentially, the more you practice, the more I think you'll feel more comfortable. And and also I would say, you know, it's sometimes you get very nervous when you're interviewing, but also watch the people who you're interviewing with. Sometimes they're giving you feedback. I'll give an example. Sometimes when people talk too long, I am somebody who always takes notes. And so when I tell them I'm going to take notes, please just continue talking. You know, don't worry about me. I don't write everything down. But there are times when the person has gone on too long. I will put down my pen and fold my hands. That generally means, you know, you're not addressing the question. And so I'm trying to give you that nonverbal cue that you should stop, and hopefully you'll notice those as well.
Before going forward, can I ask Alaya, Kelly, Mai, if they have question, if what they think that maybe what we are saying makes sense, or I see Tina as well on the phone. Do you want to say something? Something about your experience in interviewing or practicing?
I just actually had 2 interviews this week for a thing for school, and I think that
This is Alaya.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
And I think this is really helpful because I'm probably going to have more in the next week or so. So I really like all the information. And if I have more questions, I'll be sure to ask them.
That's great. Great. It's good to know.
All right, Julia, do you want to try one more?
Yes. What is tell me about, well, an example, give me an example of a time when you had to be relatively quick in coming to a decision.
Ah, I have to think about this. Think of something that I could use as um, so let's see. I was trying to submit a paper for my class, and I suddenly realized, that I am missing about 2 pages of an essay that was supposed to be 5 pages long, and I only wrote 3. And so I had to, figure out whether it was due tomorrow. So I had to figure out whether I'm gonna, skip all the rest of my activities today and spend the rest of the time writing it, or, email or contact the teacher and let them know that I will not be able to submit it on time, and is there something that needs to be done? Which in one way, means that I will be accepting that to the teacher that, I haven't been paying attention, but at the same time, it might give me an opportunity to write a better essay. So since I had very short amount of time to make a decision, it was due the next day, I ended up discussing it with my parents, and, and they helped me, get through the different options and outcomes. And, I ended up deciding to just skip the rest of my activities for that day and focusing on the paper.
Good.
Any follow-up question on that?
Yes, please.
I don't know what can be a follow-up question. Did you finish in time? Or...
I had to stay up really late, but yes, I finished on time.
And they might ask you, how was the paper received, or how well did you do, or what was your grade?
Right. And I can comment that, perhaps if I planned better, I would have gotten a better grade. But considering the situation, I think it was acceptable of an outcome given that, given my oversight.
So my only comment would be, it was obvious you weren't prepared for this question, but that was okay. You kind of, took a few minutes to think about it, and you worked through it, and were able to answer it. One of the things that's not on this slide deck is we are going to give you guys some sample questions. You will probably not be asked all of these, but I think in doing so, it will help prepare you for the type of questions you'll be asked. And so most of them are more sort of the competency-based questions, and then there are a handful of technical questions as well.
Well, and I'm hoping that these questions, especially, right, that they're not, right, it's not necessarily something that is intended for someone to be completely ready for. I think they're designed so that it's not something, you can yes, you can probably look through the lists of the questions, and I mean, I think many of them are available online. But I think just going through the question in your head, and thinking through what is it that you can think about, it can actually be quite hard. But going with an example that first comes to your head, and kind of working through it is okay. I think whoever is interviewing you will be expecting that.
Exactly.
I think that's the purpose of those questions, is to sort of catch you and see how you think.
And I think this last question is a perfect example of there are no right or wrong answers. You could have made the decision to talk with the professor and get an extension, and that's not a right or wrong answer. It's more how you thought through it. You sought advice. It's not a case of you giving up. So it's sort of just walking you through the steps.
Yeah.
So, we sort of touched on this. The next kind of thought here is at the conclusion of the interview, sending a thank you note. And to reiterate, it is key to send it sooner rather than later, partly because often decisions do get made fairly quickly. So if you're able to go home and send out an email, or some people do send out thank you notes by mail. I know it seems kind of strange, but that does happen every once in a while. That is good, because it really shows that you're interested. I think it's good practice. I've seen where, let's say you interview with 5 people, you might send a message to your main point of contact and send out kind of a general group thank you. Some people do it where it's individual. When you interview, sometimes people will give you their business cards, or their information is readily available through their website, and so you can get their individual email addresses. There's no right or wrong. Often when people email me and ask me as the recruiter for the email addresses, I don't tend to give those out, because part of the recruiter's job is to respect the time of the hiring team. And so I will often say, you can send me the thank you notes, and I will forward them on. And then I will often do that. And when I do that, I do send them out individually. So the key is to actually send a thank you. The more specific you can be is great, but if you can't, when I talked with Erin, she mentioned something specific and I can address that, that's okay. Just acknowledge and say thank you, and that you hope to work for the company, or you hope to work with the person. It doesn't have to be 6 lines or 3 paragraphs. It can be 2 sentences.
And actually, you pointed to one thing, that during the interviews, it is useful to take notes on at least the first names of the people that you're interviewing with. So you have that. They were not everybody has business cards. And so it's just a nice way for yourself to then remember who was it and in what order. And especially if it's a day-long interview, there will be many people that you will be meeting, and it might be really hard to remember everybody. So sort of writing them down in the order the day that you went is helpful. Or if it's a panel, writing them down sort of in the, left to right or whatever works for you. I mean, if you're lucky, there might be an agenda that is given to you, and then that's a nice way to keep that. So make sure you save it and bring it with you, because that will have an outline of the people and sometimes even contact information. And then we have some questions. Let's see. So we say thanks and gratitude at the end of the interview, as well as send an email. And do we send the thank you email at that night or the next day? Or is there such a thing as too soon?
I don't think you want to send it from your car. or right when you leave the building. But no, other than that, I don't think there's too soon.
And yes, to the first question, you want to thank at the end of the interview and send an email after the fact. So yes, those are two separate thank yous. And then there's another question. Is it okay if we have follow-up questions to include in the thank you email?
I say yes.
All right, so the answer is yes.
I think it also shows actually that you're thoughtful, or, you know, you said this and it made me wonder if, you know, blah, blah, blah. I think that's very appropriate. And it also shows a level of engagement that doesn't always happen.
Excellent. Well, Julia, how are you feeling? Or Erin, how are you feeling with time?
We're very good on time because, you know, the last sort of point, which isn't necessarily on a slide, is practice, practice, practice.
Aha. Excellent.
And so I will, let's see if I can figure out how to get off the slides. Yep. And then I'll show you, can you guys see the Word doc or no?
You have to change your sharing. So
right.
Instead of
That's what I
sharing
thought.
PowerPoint, you have to share your Word doc.
So here are, you know, just some sample questions, and we've sort of categorized them different. Everyone can see this now, correct?
I can see it.
Okay, as long as one, then I'm sure everyone can. You know, so there are a variety of different types of questions. And again, Loya is going to send this out so that everyone, you know, has it. I think we've made the point, but I'll reiterate it. It's not always, you know, you may not get this exact question. Tell me about a time when you achieved a difficult goal. But I think if you're prepared to sort of talk about a challenge or a difficult, and just by practicing answering that question gets you to think about not a general, can you complete a difficult goal, but how have you done it in the past, I think will help you.
And I will note that a difficult goal, right? You can stress it's a difficult goal for you specifically. It doesn't, you know, you don't have to try to evaluate, is it really difficult on the big scheme of things? As long as it was difficult for you and you can explain why it was difficult, right? And then walk through how it went.
Exactly.
Deanna, this is Lloyd. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Can you give an example where, say, as a high school student, I don't have, maybe this will be my first internship or my first job, and most of my examples would be about maybe working at home, cooking, babysitting, chores. Would that be translatable to a job interview or internship interview?
Absolutely. I mean, you can, there's many examples that you can employ, whether it's, you know, doing the dishes at home or trying to manage your schedule between getting from school to your extracurricular activity, right? Just all of these would be excellent examples, right? And if it's a question about teamwork and you haven't had a, you know, an experience where you were working with someone, right? You can talk about working on a team at a club at school or working at a team in a class where you're doing a project together. I mean, it could even be a team with your sisters and brothers because, you know, you're trying to coordinate who does the dishes and takes out the garbage or whatever it is, right? So all of these are relevant examples as long as you can relate them to the question, right? You have to make sure you make you know, address whatever the question is asking, you know, and use your daily life is absolutely appropriate. I mean, we know you, so we know there's plenty of examples that you guys can come up with from your clubs and all the other activities, your volunteer work. I mean, there's many things that I know you guys are involved in that you can bring in. And that's also a way to highlight different types of activities that you are engaged in, right? So sort of it helps to point to those things and make it more specific and real when you're interviewing. So it's sort of, you can kind of even play that as to your own advantage. Right. So as the questions are being asked, you can bring in examples from different activities that you participate in. Did that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. Also, if you can relate that situation where there was one intern that you were looking at the resume and it didn't seem like because she mentioned working in the garage, helping the dad, maybe fixing cars or doing woodworking.
That's right, yes. So I did have a student that actually had a quite poorly looking interview. I mean, not interview, resume. But during the interview, the student was actually able to discuss other activities that didn't ever make it to the resume, and things like working in the garage, on building furniture for their bedroom, right, is something that they were working on, which highlighted different skill set that they had that, they thought wasn't useful, right? Or, I mean, and examples of that could be, gardening where you're building boxes for your flower pots, right? It's something that you would think would not be relevant, but if you're applying, for example, some sort of mechanical engineering related job, the hands-on type experiences are very important. So whoever is interviewing you, it might actually be like, oh, you actually have this experience, but perhaps to you it wasn't relevant right away. So it's something good, and it's probably very good to bring that up at the interview stage, because maybe it's not, not something you'll put on your resume, but it, can easily come out during the interview. And if you do feel like it's important to highlight, cover letter might be another place to talk about.
And it may also be a new experience that wasn't reflected on your resume. So that's very appropriate to bring up in the interview on as well. Oh, since I submitted, I've started working on a project with my, uncle in the garage where I'm building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that would always be good to highlight.
Right. I mean, and things like baking, for example, right, that involves a lot of, following procedures. That's actually, I think I might have shared that with some of you, where that was one of the first interviews that I had, and it's something that I was applying for a clean room job. And one of the questions was, have you done work in the past that required following processes? And the only thing I could think of was cooking, but, after the fact, I realized that was the perfect answer, because cooking requires following directions, and especially something like baking requires following directions very precisely if you want something to come out a specific way. But having that recognition and bringing that out, is right, and connecting to why it's relevant to the question, right? That's important. So yeah, there was another example. I just lost it. I'll think of it in a second. So if someone else wanted to add.
Yeah, looking at the questions that Erin is sharing on the screen right now, I wanted to remind the girls, a lot of this is tell me about a time, and that's where the preparation matters a lot, because either you have a lot of experiences or you don't have much, and so you want to be prepared. When you hear a question, you're not hearing it for the first time. Like when you hear this question, you already know for that type of question, this particular experience would work, or that particular experience would work. So having those situations already kind of lined up in your preparation matters a lot. And then the second part is doing what Erin said, the SAR. If you can do an SAR in 2 minutes, meaning describe the situation, what action did you take, and what was the result? if you haven't prepared, you'll probably end up talking for 5 minutes. But if you prepare, then you can do SAR in 2 minutes.
Thank you. You reminded me, I was going to bring up things like babysitting. So it is an absolutely great one to bring up and describe. But what's helpful, this preparation could be helpful in a way where you can sit down and think about, yes, it's babysitting, maybe not relevant to my coding job that I'm applying for right now, but going through and thinking, what are the skills that are necessary for babysitting that you have demonstrated? So responsibility, right? Being able to manage schedules, organize someone, take care of them, take them places, just kind of sitting there and writing down what are the types of skills that you have brought to the table when you were babysitting. And it's just going through that thought process will help you then when you are interviewing, be able to pull those words out of your memory much easier than if you're trying to think of it on the spot.
And I'm just going to add that there might be times where they ask for an example and you cannot think of anything. I think it's appropriate to say, can we come back to that question? If you're stumped, you don't want to sit there for 2 minutes and just, because honestly, you'll get nervous and then you'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't have an example. How can I need to get an example. And then you're not focused on finding anything. So if you say to the interviewer, I can't think of an example at the moment. Can we come back to that question? You'll get to your next question, do that question really well, and then you might be able to come back and think about something. So if you do come up a time where you truly cannot think of an example, ask them, can we come back to that question?
Excellent. So I think we had some examples of technical questions too.
Yep. I'll arrow down to those.
Sure. And I was going to note that, and maybe I'll be speaking more to your first job application. I'm not sure it will necessarily happen in that way for an internship. I guess it depends what level of internship it is. But different people will have different interviewing styles. So some people will make it very casual and they will just have a conversation with you. I'm specifically talking about sort of the technical people that you might be interviewing with. So they might not necessarily be asking you any specific technical questions, but they will try to understand your background and where you have been, why you are interested in this job, and how your experience relates to this job. So it will be a kind of a conversational, trying to understand why you're a good candidate. And in those cases, you need to make sure, right, you talk to the different strengths that you think you bring to the table when you're responding, in that sort of more casual way of interviewing you. And then in some cases, people will be ready with tricky questions. They will be literally riddle type questions. And I have seen that happen numerous times. And the thing about the riddle questions, the easy way out, of course, if you know them, you know them. The hard thing is that you might not have enough time to think of an answer if you don't know, right? So then following the same approach as what we've described for sort of how to prepare for behavioral type questions, going through your thought process then is very important, right? Just go through the different types of considerations you're having. If I do this, it's that, right? Just kind of to help your whoever is interviewing you hear your process. I think that's much better than sitting there and trying to figure out whatever the riddle they're trying to give you. So that's just, don't get stomped by the fact that you might not figure it out. It's okay. Actually, I know that some of the people that do riddles don't even expect anyone to figure it out. They just want to see how they react to be in a situation where they're not comfortable or don't know the answer, and what they do about it or whatever. So I mean, these are very specific type. You might never encounter these, but they definitely happen, especially in the engineering field. They will happen. Just be ready for that. And then we've put together some more, focused questions that are, these may not be the questions that you would be asked, but they're sort of, more lower level, giving an idea of what you might be asked. So if you were in college, they would probably be asking something that you probably should know at your college level. And I tried to put things that are maybe more general, and might be helpful to sort of think about, kind of give yourself an introduction to that field. And so we have a question: is it hurtful to use filler words like or in an interview? Well, I just used one. I don't think when I interview, whether it's interns or people applying for, other positions, I don't think I ever use that as a negative. But Erin, you might be a better person to comment on that.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. The reality is that we guess that you're going to be a little nervous. Often the folks who aren't recruiters are often a little nervous too. And so they might also and the more you are comfortable, you'll probably use it less, but it's totally fine. You're not giving a presentation that you've planned for 6 days. They understand that you do not know the answers to their exact questions. And I think, Diana, your comment, you're going to get a wide variety. We have focused on sort of the concept of behavioral based interviewing, but you are going to get people that just chat with you about your resume and don't ever take notes, may not even have your resume in front of you. So I would also recommend bring an extra copy or two of your resume for those people who, were pulled into a meeting and then literally just made it to your interview. It's always nice if you're prepared. It's always nice for you to have a copy of it as well with you so you can look at it. But, expect the unexpected in a lot of ways is sort of the norm, because not everybody is going to do it the same.
Oh, that's you made me think of another thing, is that actually it is, for the technical piece of it, it sometimes is useful to bring examples of your work. And actually I see it now much more often than in the past. So people will bring a drawing of whatever they've made, or a picture of like something that they've put together, or a sample line of code, or show an app that they've developed, right? Having that available, and I would recommend having it printed rather than trying to pull it up on your laptop. I mean, it's okay. It just takes some time away from the conversation, and it aggravates people sometimes. Like if you're trying to look through your phone pictures to show something, I would not necessarily recommend doing that. But having that somehow much more readily available, so you can say, look, this is what I've done, and this is how it was on this project, and bringing Julia's comment back and saying, this was my contribution, this is, the part I made, or this is what I did, or this is the set of slides I've put together for this presentation we did to the funding agency. Whatever, it's actually very useful to have with you in addition to your resume. Not necessary, but nice to have if it's, if it makes sense in the conversation.
And similarly, you might be asked to code, or you might be asked to go to a whiteboard and do something.
Oh, absolutely. We do this to our students that we hire actually at SLAC, and I can tell you it's very stressful for them, because they're doing it in front of, right, a team of people that is evaluating sort of their process of thinking. But at the same time, we don't expect it to be perfect. It gives us an idea at what level you are at, so we can gauge whether, if you come onto the team, where would we have to get you started? And it's an intern position. It's absolutely okay. We have people who have very minimal skills that we've hired and people who were really exceptional. So it's just kind of being open about where you are and walking people through that. Thank you, Erin, very much for pointing that out. That's very good.
Well, and I know we have a couple of questions. And so I think, there are often times where people are not understanding your thought process or how you're explaining it. And if they say, I don't understand, be prepared to sort of give another example or say it slightly differently. There are definitely times where I ask a question and you can tell the person has no idea of what I'm asking. So I then have to ask it a little differently. And so similarly, if you are answering a question and the person says, I don't understand what you're talking about, you're going to have to be prepared to answer it slightly differently to kind of get at the process.
I think you answered Rucha's question. Is that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And Loy, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to, regarding the filler words, if there's anything that's harmful, it would be high school students that use the word like when they don't mean like. Like this and like, it used to be very, very, very common, and now it's becoming so. You start your sentence with so. So even if you don't mean to use the word so.
Or if you say, yeah. Well, and then, that would be my pet peeve because I don't know. This is why I'm asking you the question.
Well, and also perhaps using appropriate language, since we are talking about this, is important. I maybe that sounds like a trivial thing to say, but it's just making sure you're not using language that maybe is inappropriate for a work environment.
So no swear words.
Yes.
It is something that should be practiced, not just for an interview. For your regular communication style, it helps to get rid of the unnecessary words.
Yeah. And be aware that, if somebody asks about coding, and okay, I shouldn't be asking about coding, right? Because I'm not a coder. But there are times where people ask me to ask about coding, and then you give an example, and I don't really know what you're talking about. So I'm going to then ask a question, and you might think, well, that's just a silly question because of course, you would do it this way. But be prepared that that's not my skill set. But I'm asking you because I want to understand, one, do you know it? And then two, can you explain it to somebody who doesn't know it? So even though it seems, silly, I'll just keep using that word, that I would even come up with a follow-up question, I'm not always just asking for the exact answer, but how you can describe it to others.
I know we're running out of time, but I was just curious, Diana, I see the question about aeronautical engineering. It says, why do rockets fly? If you have no idea why, how would you answer that question?
Well, you could try to think of, so maybe, depending on your background, right? If I can't imagine that anybody would ask you that question if you were not applying for a job that was related to aeronautical engineering. So this is a technical question, hopefully related to the field you're applying for. So if you were going into aeronautical engineering, I'm just suggesting you that you probably should know why rockets fly, one, and then, two, if for whatever reason you couldn't think of exact explanation, just going back to the knowledge that you do have, you can think about, well, how is something propelled, right? What are the basic physics that I know that explains motion in general, right? And what can move something forward, right? And then think back about the rocket and think about, okay, well, what is in the rocket case propelling it forward, right? What is specifically happening with the rocket, right? And in this case, right, the wrong answer a lot of the times is like, well, the exhaust is pushing the rocket against the, the earth or something like that. So that's, a wrong type of answer. But if you use that answer, maybe walk through it a little better. But the good answer is, right, you have a lot of energetic particles from the rocket fuel that are escaping the body of the rocket and propelling it forward, right? Because, their direction of flow is in the opposite of the direction of the rocket. So, but that's, just depending on the field that you're applying for, make sure you know at least some fundamental concepts.
Well, what I can add is that if you really are not sure about the answer, don't try to come up with something similar or invented. But you can say, I studied this and I studied this and I studied this. And if I'm certainly able to understand it, if I was going to, working on how to make rocket flies, I would certainly able to, work on that. Or
right.
If I was actually asked to understand how a rocket flies, then I can understand it because I have the background for it. So it's just, don't try to come up with it's trying to explain it when you don't know exactly how it explain is kind of, maybe you can say some general terms and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'm close, but not exactly. But yeah.
And I'll just add, technical questions are really going to depend upon the position. So to reiterate what we're saying, if let's say you're applying for a communications job where you're using your scientific knowledge, but you're going to be writing. So they might ask you a technical question around different styles of writing. So your technical questions are not always going to be just engineering or science focus. It's really going to depend upon the job that you're applying to.
They're like job specific questions is probably a better way to call them than technical.
Yes, I can edit that, and then when we send it out, that'll be there.
And so the other thing I wanted to remind everyone, since you guys were at a camp, I know it's on top of your list to remember, but right, you making sure you use your power poses, right, to prepare yourself for the interview, and making sure you shake their hands and look them in the eye like we practiced, right, and making sure you communicate and create that network in sort of an effective way. Just your body language and the way you present yourself makes a big difference. So, make sure you don't forget that.
Okay.
All right.
Any other question, girls? I think we are running out of time, so.
We're out of time, yes. If there are no more questions.
So I hope this was
stop
useful.
Sharing just in case you had something else.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will pause the recording then, and then we'll thank everyone for participating. And hopefully we'll be in touch with the next topic soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for hosting this.
We will post all the new Sage Camp on Instagram, so take a look at that to see how it's progressing. Thank you to the first group that trust us for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for doing this. It was really helpful.
Yeah,
great.
Thanks, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice rest of your day, guys.